Levi here, the Outdoor Cowboy, and welcome back to the Outdoor Cowboy YouTube channel. Today, we're going to be talking about how to not get life flighted when you're out surviving in the wilderness. So saddle up for the ride. Alright, you might have figured it out from the intro, but today we're going to be talking about bushcraft first aid, or the things that you need to take when you're out survival camping or in the wilderness, just to make sure you're ready for things like cuts and bruises and even more extreme things as well. So I've got my first aid kit here. I have this cool little camo pouch, and then I put the red American flag on there just so I know this is my first aid kit. And this is pretty much what I bring every time I go survival camping. I just pack everything in this bag and then throw this into my backpack. I think it's really important to have a designated first aid kit. If that's a bag like this, or something smaller, or like a little pouch, or just a pocket in your backpack that's dedicated to first aid, I think it's really important. I usually pack this as one of the last things in my backpack so that it's more readily accessible for me, because when you need it, you'll definitely need it. So it's definitely important to have a designated place when you're survival camping to have a first aid kit and have your first aid gear, because it's super important. So let's jump into our first item that's in our first aid kit. Alright, for the first item that's in our first aid kit, we've got some dirt, because if you get injured, just rub some dirt on it. Alright, I don't actually bring dirt in my first aid kit. It's readily accessible when I'm out survival camping, but kind of a joke, but I just wanted to bring this up. This is something that I heard growing up. Whenever I'd get hurt, my dad would say rub some dirt on it. And literally that sometimes happened if I got hurt, like on my bike or on a dirt bike or something, and wrecked into the dirt. Then dirt got applied to the wounds, not necessarily voluntarily, but the principle behind it I think is really good. Survival camping, being in the outdoors, is oftentimes really hard. And a lot of times you're in places where injury can happen. If you're hiking long distances or steep trails or anything like that, it can be easy to trip and fall. You might get scrapes or bruise or even strains. So stuff like that. If you're cutting down trees or even just using sharp tools, there's always a risk of cutting yourself or scratching yourself, anything like that. The outdoors are pretty unforgiving, and so it's going to be pretty difficult when you're out. Don't expect like an all-inclusive 5-star resort when you're in the outdoors, because you're probably not going to get it. Most things out here are unforgiving, and they're definitely not full service. So it's important to think about that when you're in the outdoors, things are definitely going to happen. And so I think the phrase rub some dirt on it kind of warrants 3 things. The first thing that I think it means is we're going to say saddle up for the ride, which if you haven't got your saddle up for the ride merch, definitely go check it out. It's my favorite shirt. But I think it's just important. You guys know that I say that every video, but what it really means is just being ready and accepting the hard things that we're going to go through, but finding joy in them. So when you're in the outdoors, if you get minor cuts or scrapes, they're not going to stop you from having fun. Just saddle up for the ride. The second thing I think is just to be super careful when you're in the outdoors. It's super important. Survival camping and being in the outdoors is already an extremely hard thing, which is what makes it fulfilling. But it gets really hard if you're hurt or injured and have to care for extra things, anything like that. So being super careful when you're going out, knowing where you're going, knowing the conditions, and kind of knowing what to expect so that you can be prepared. And that takes us to our third thing, which is being prepared, which is probably the most important thing. Before you ever go out survival camping, make sure you're prepared for any situation. When you're in the outdoors, you're probably far from help, so you're kind of on your own or with the group that you have for if anything happens. So making sure that you have the things needed to be able to be successful if someone gets hurt, gets a cut, gets a scrape, is super important. And I think as we're talking about first aid, I would say that most of the time when we're talking about first aid in the outdoors, the first aid is to respond to whatever happened, whether that's a fall or a cut, bruise, anything like that, and be able to help long enough for you to get to civilization, to get emergency medical care or just other care that you might not be able to offer yourself when you're in the outdoors. Obviously, there are some situations where you're really far out and it might be a multiple day trip back, and you need to do first aid to just get yourself back to normal so you can continue with the trip or anything like that. But I really think that most of the time you're first aid. If you get hurt when you're in the outdoors, your first priority should be able to get back to civilization to get proper medical care. And there's some times where little cuts and things won't make a difference. You can put a band-aid on it and you'll be fine. But little things can become big things really quickly when you're in the outdoors. So making sure that you get the proper care as quickly as possible is important. And you'll never know when you're going to need a first aid kit. You could just be in a camping site with your family or super far off in the bush, and anything could happen in either of those situations. So it's really important to have a first aid kit with you at all times in any situation. The next thing I want to cover before we jump into our actual list, other than dirt, is that there are some injuries where you necessarily can't bring stuff for, or you might not be able to be super equipped for it. We won't cover all of them, but burns is one that I can think of. If you get a burn, it just needs to be rinsed and covered and needs to just take time to heal. And maybe things like a bandage or Neosporin might help, but that's definitely something that you're not going to fix quickly and be able to get out. Other things that I can think of are hypothermia or shock. Those things are really hard to treat, though they're not like unimportant. They're just pretty hard, and the treatments for them come more from being prepared in other situations. If you or someone has hypothermia, it's important to have extra layers to be able to layer up and stay warm, have insulation, which that stuff doesn't necessarily come from your first aid kit. And then lastly, there are a lot of things that we're not going to cover today for our first aid kit. When I think of the term first aid, there's so many things that goes into it. There's so many different injuries or things that could happen to you in the outdoors. We're going to be covering kind of just the basics today. Things I can think of like an emergency blanket or a flashlight or other things could be great things to put into a first aid kit. Those are things that we put into our emergency survival kit that we made a couple of videos ago. That'll be linked. If you haven't seen it, go watch it after this video. And I didn't really want to have cover up between these two things because they can be separate if you have both of these things. It's not super important to have redundancy, but maybe if you don't want to have a survival kit, including some of those things in your first aid kit can be beneficial as well. So we're going to be more covering the basic, just first aid stuff today that I take with me when I'm in the outdoors. So let's jump into the actual contents of my first aid kit. A lot of the stuff in here is exactly how I have it in my backpack, and then I added a couple extra things just to talk about them. But we're going to go through these. We're going to group them together into 5 different groups, kind of just their uses or maybe how they work. So we're going to talk about each group, and there's a couple things in each group. So we're going to go through them, talk about how you can use them, how they might help you in the outdoors, and how to avoid having to use these, because our first aid kit, ideally we should never have to use it, but we don't ever want to not have it but need it. So let's open this up and jump into our first group, which is stopping bleeding. And the first thing I want to hit real quick that I think is really important is having a tourniquet. There's a bunch of different kinds of them. I have like a cool elastic one. I really like these ones just because they're in this sealed package and they don't weigh very much or take up very much space. But there's other kinds that are like a strap and have a thing that you turn to tighten the tourniquet, or there's other elastic ones. Any of them can work. They all have the same goal to stop bleeding. But it's definitely something that I think is worth spending the extra money to buy a nice one. Because a tourniquet is something that I'm grateful I've never had to use. But when you need a tourniquet, you need a tourniquet. Tourniquets are obviously for very extreme situations. You shouldn't just use a tourniquet if you get a small cut, because that can lead to more damages. But if there's heavy bleeding and an artery needs to be stopped or all blood flow needs to be stopped, a tourniquet can be great. And again, if you get into a situation like that, a tourniquet can literally save your life. So this is our first item that I wanted to hit really hard just because I think it's really important. If a big accident happens, this can save your life. So our first item is a tourniquet and stopping bleeding. And then the other items in this group are Band-Aids, which come in all shapes and sizes, and then gauze as well. These are both super important things. Everyone knows what a Band-Aid is and has probably used them. I've probably used hundreds and hundreds of Band-Aids in my life growing up, just doing dumb things, getting hurt, getting cut, just like that. And then gauze is definitely for a little heavier bleeding. And we'll talk about different ways that maybe you can secure your gauze, but it can be great just to stop bleeding. You can just put the gauze right over the cut and apply pressure, and that'll help us stop bleeding. Obviously Band-Aids, they come in different shapes and sizes, but they're for pretty minor bleeding. Most of them have like a little piece of gauze to soak up blood, but it's not very big. So definitely having different options is important for different sizes of cuts and things like that, different needs. But super important to have these. I use them all the time when I'm camping, just for different scrapes. If you're walking through bushes and you get scraped, or cut yourself with a tool, anything like that, it's important to stop bleeding. So these are the 3 things that are in group number 1, stop bleeding. We got a tourniquet, a gauze, and some Band-Aids. And obviously it's important to stop bleeding. It kind of goes without being said, but I just want to touch on it real quick. That blood loss can be detrimental and even deadly if you lose too much, so definitely don't want that to happen. Stopping bleeding is super important. Your blood carries oxygen, carries nutrients, carries all the things you need to live, so it's important to keep all of it inside of your body. But another good thing about gauze and Band-Aids is they also cover the cut, which is super important. So not only do they stop bleeding, but they also protect the cut, which is important. Because anytime you have an open wound of any kind, whether that's a blister, a cut, a scrape, anything like that, it's an opportunity for bacteria to get inside of you and cause infections. So covering our wounds and stopping blood at the same time is a benefit of these, which is super important. Now we are on to group 2 for our first aid kit, which is cleanliness, which is super important when you're in the outdoors. Obviously, a lot of times you're super dirty, whether it's dirt or mud, or you've been walking a long time, you've been on your hands and knees building, anything like that. There's so many things in the outdoors, which all of it has bacteria. So it's super important that if you have to like work on a wound or touch a wound, anything like that, that you're clean. So I always make sure to have some latex gloves with me, just in case I ever get cut and my hands are dirty, and then I won't get any bacteria or any sickness into the cut. And then we also have antiseptic wipes, which there's a bunch of different options that all work good. There's alcohol wipes, there's povidone iodine prep pads, or benzalkonium chloride pads. Any of these just clean out the wound and kill bacteria and make it so that you can cover it up and it won't have bacteria inside of it. So that's our group tube, just cleanliness, making sure that our cuts and wounds are cleaned out so there's not any bacteria in them, and making sure that we don't get more bacteria in them. Our third group is pain relief, which can be important. If you get hurt, or even things just like sprains or bruises, it can be nice to have a little pain reliever. So we got our Tylenol, anything like this, Tylenol, ibuprofen, whatever it is, can be great to have. Just one or two of them just to get you through. Again, I think it's a thing where if you get hurt, if one of your joints hurts or anything like that, or you get a bruise or a sprain, having just a little bit of painkiller can just make the time more enjoyable, but also just give you enough energy and strength to be able to get out where you can rest it and get proper medical care. And then the other thing is some Neosporin or some antibiotic ointment or cream that has painkiller in it. I think this stuff is awesome. I use it a ton when I get scratches and stuff like that. Just throw a little bit of this on and then a Band-Aid over it, and that usually helps it not hurt, stay clean, and heal quickly. Okay, now we're on to our fourth group, which is just different kinds of wraps, which that's one way we can apply our gauze. You put a big piece of gauze on and then wrap it. But there are even wraps that are like this that are made completely of gauze, so they can be great to wrap around something. Or there's kind of a mixture like this, or there's more like almost athletic tape like this. Any of these can be great, it just depends on what you need them for. Obviously, the harder tape like this isn't going to soak up any blood or help with blood clots. Stuff like this will, but this stuff might be stronger, more durable, maybe even waterproof. So definitely use this stuff to like wrap gauze onto a wound, but if you need to use this stuff to be your actual gauze, anything like this that can work, just to wrap around it. But all of these are also great for applying pressure, because you can either push down on these or wrap them just a little bit tight. Obviously not enough to like cut off any blood circulation, but just enough to apply pressure to the wound so that it'll stop bleeding quicker. Wraps like this are a great option. So that's group number 4. Let's move on to group number 5. All right, our group number 5 is just kind of the miscellaneous category of the others. I just wanted to hit on real quick. So our first kind of miscellaneous or other is our moleskin, which can be super important if you're hiking or going long ways. Obviously your goal should be that your hiking boots or whatever you're wearing doesn't cause any pain, but sometimes after hiking 10 or 20 miles, there is no boot or shoe that would be perfectly comfortable. So having something like this can be great for helping with blisters. Blisters can not only hurt super bad, but they can also be a great place for bacteria to enter, which obviously we don't want. So having moleskin like this, if you start to feel any rubbing or any pain, any inflammation like that, throw some moleskin around it just to take pressure off that area, just to try to not cause blisters. If you already have a blister, and this goes for any kind of blister, either burns or friction, anything like that, make sure to try not to pop the blister, because blisters are our body's way of naturally healing. And anytime that we pop a blister or rip the skin off, our body is super susceptible to getting sick and getting bacteria in that spot. So try to prevent blisters the best you can, but if you're unable to prevent them, then make sure to try to keep them closed so that they heal better and you won't get sick. All right, our next miscellaneous is kind of a personal favorite, kind of a hack that I have, something that I really like to do, which is KT tape or kinesthesiology tape. Anything like this, I think is great. If I had to pick one thing to do at all, this might be it. I'd probably take this and some gauze, just because I can use this for a lot of stuff. Obviously, an athletic kinesthesiology tape like this, its actual role is to help with tendons and muscles, so it can work great for that. If you have a joint that's bugging you or you pull a muscle, this can be great to apply, and it will help you be able to hike, walk, build, anything that you need to do to survive. So that's its first great use, but I think it can also work as a great bandage. It's super sticky, so you can wrap it around stuff and it will stay super well. You can even get waterproof stuff. And I've had tape like this last for days doing physical activities and getting wet. So that can be super good, is that it won't fall off. You won't have to keep reapplying. So if you clean it, throw gauze on it, throw this over it, can be great. But I also think that the elastic characteristic of it is super important. Not only does it give you the ability to pull a wound closed, sort of like stitches, put it on one side, pull it, and stick it on the other side, and it will close that wound, which can be helpful for healing. But you can also use it to apply a lot of pressure to an area if you're not able to hold on it. And the elasticity of it will still make it so your blood can flow and you can breathe, and it doesn't feel like you're cutting your arm off or your leg off, but it will apply a great pressure to that wound. So KT tape is just a favorite that I have. I always have some with me just because I think it has so many uses, and I think it's just really durable, sticky stuff that's awesome to have. All right, and then the last thing in our miscellaneous category is something that I know I said at the beginning of this video we were going to cover just the first aid basics, but I just wanted to cover this, a satellite phone. I use a Garmin Reach Mini, super great satellite phone, gets really good service, and it can send messages, also has an SOS button, which is kind of what I want to touch on. Just having the ability to call for help, call for emergencies if you're in the outdoors. A lot of times when you're in the outdoors, you don't have service, which is something I love about it, the beauty of it, but making sure that I still have a way where if I'm in critical danger, I can still get help, and if I'm unable to move or even help myself, I can use this to get life flight or anything like that, because your life is the most important thing, so making sure that you preserve it in every way that you possibly can. So if you're in the outdoors a lot, I definitely recommend looking into a satellite phone. I really like the Garmin Reach Mini. If you guys want a review on it or to ask me any questions of how it works, definitely let me know. You can ask me questions or let me know if you want a review on it. I love it. Use it on all my different trips just to be safe. I love being able to talk to my wife while I'm out, but also just the security of being able to call for help, call for an emergency if I need to. So that's the last thing, just being able to call for help, call for emergencies, an ambulance, life flight, whatever it is, if you're in need, so that you can stay alive. So just like that, we made it through the 5 groups of things that are in my first aid kit when I'm out in the outdoors, and the things that I think are most important to have, just for the simple things. Obviously there's so many things that you could expand upon this, and comment down below other things that you think are important, maybe that are kind of a level above this, that cover some other things or anything like that, which in the future there's definitely going to be some videos where maybe hypothermia or shock, something like that, we go way deeper into, maybe when we're out winter camping, how to avoid hypothermia and how to treat it. So there'll definitely be some videos in the future where we cover more in-depth stuff. I just wanted this to be a quick overview of what I carry in my Bushcraft first aid kit when I'm out survival camping. So those are the 5 groups of things that I bring. I really like all of them because most first aid stuff is pretty light and pretty small, which I think is great. It's super important to have and super light. That's kind of the combo we want with everything. So first aid stuff, super important. Like I said, any situation that can happen, and it's important to know what's in your first aid kit and know how to use it. If you have a tourniquet but have no idea how to use it, when you need a tourniquet, it's not going to help at all. So definitely important to know what's inside. Check up regularly, make sure stuff doesn't expire, pain medication, anything like that, creams, ointments. Make sure it's not expired. Obviously if you don't use it for a long time, that's a great thing, but just checking up on it every once in a while, making sure that it's up to date, has everything that you want and anything that you might need. So that's it for like the contents of our first aid kit, the things that I bring. But now let's go a little more bushcraft and talk about 7 different bushcraft tips for first aid, things that necessarily aren't in your first aid kit that you can use when you're out. The first one is if you don't have a gauze or a bandage, any kind of cloth, whether that's a bandana, a shirt, anything like that, you can rip it or just use it and just put it over the wound and apply pressure on it. Anything like that is great. Obviously the point of any like gauze or bandage or dressing, anything like that, is just to cause blood clotting, just so that that wound will stop bleeding outside of the body. So anything that will kind of soak up the blood but also hold it to cause blood clotting will work great. So if you don't have bandages or anything readily available, you can use items of clothing, bandanas, any piece of cloth as your pressure dressing so that you can stop bleeding and get the wound under control. The second one is an improvised tourniquet. You can use things like a belt, paracord, shoelace, anything like that that you can pull super tight. It may not work as well as some of the real tourniquets because a lot of them have tightening devices so that you can get it really tight, because you do have to get it pretty tight for tourniquets. I've never put one on fully, but I've heard that they hurt pretty bad. Obviously they keep you from dying, so it's worth it, but you can definitely make some improvised tourniquets work. So if you don't have a tourniquet and you're bleeding a lot, you need to stop blood flow, anything like that can work great. If you have a belt, take it off, put it through the belt loop and pull it really tight. A tourniquet, some paracord or a shoelace you can use as a tourniquet. And for those to get tight, if you wrap them around it, leave them kind of loose, and take anything like a pen or a stick or a knife and shove it through it and then start to spin it. That can be a great way to make sure the tourniquet gets super tight and stops bleeding. Our third one is improvised splints. Obviously if you have a bone break or a really bad strain or tear, it can be really important to splint that area. Especially if you get something like a broken leg or a broken arm. Splinting it can make it so that you don't cause any more damage or unnecessary pain, and can just help you have a better time when you get to the emergency medical services. And there really are tons of things you could use for a splint. You could use tent poles, tent stakes, any just stick or branch that you find, and just some paracord to kind of fasten the arm or leg, whatever it is, to that stick can work as a great splint. And the fourth one, kind of along the same line, is an improvised sling. if you hurt your shoulder or your arm, making a sling can be really helpful, just to not overwork it and to reduce pain. So there's tons of things you can make a sling out of. It can be as simple as wrap some paracord kind of around your neck and then around your arm just to hold your arm up, or make one out of a bandana or a shirt, anything like that. Again, just to stabilize it, immobilize it so that it doesn't get more hurt or cause more pain. But get really creative if you need a sling, because there's tons of different options. The fifth one is definitely getting deep into bushcraft, but pine sap or honey can work as a natural antiseptic, but only if you have nothing else available. Definitely not the first choice, because those things can't have bacteria in them, but they can work if needed. And sometimes if you're really in an emergency situation, it's definitely weighing the odds of a wound might get infected or it might hurt more, but if it stops bleeding or anything like that, then it's definitely worth it. So that can be a trick if you don't have any antiseptic cream or anything like that with you. Our sixth bushcraft first aid tip is one that kind of will overlap with our survival kit, but I just wanted to cover it because it's duct tape. We put duct tape into our survival kit because we talked about how it has so many uses, and one of those uses can be a bandage. So having some duct tape can work for so many things, but it can be a very simple but effective bandage if you need something really quick. And then our seventh and final bushcraft first aid tip is that fire can use to sterilize tools or knives, anything like that. If you fall and get a big cut and there's a bunch of dirt or things in it, it can be important to clean that wound out. And obviously using clean, like purified water is really important for any wound, but sometimes that can't get everything out, so you might need maybe like some pliers or a knife just to get some things out. But it's important that your knife doesn't go from skinning a deer or cutting something up right into cleaning out a wound. So making sure that it's sterile, washing it off with water, but then putting it in the fire can kill all bacteria. So you can either use just a lighter on a knife blade or whatever you're using, or stick it in the fire for a while. Anything like that can kill all the bacteria and make it so that it's sterile enough for you to work on your wound and not get more sick. But with stuff like that, I usually try to stay away from doing too much on a wound. I think tourniquets and bandages are a great option because it doesn't take a lot of effort from you. Obviously there's people that carry around scissors and stitches and a needle in their kit with them, but I think that's usually pretty unrealistic. It can be really hard to clean it enough to stitch it closed and not get a bacterial infection in there. It can also just hurt really bad and be extremely hard to stitch yourself up, and it can lead to complications further down the line when you're getting it treated by a medical professional. So I usually try to stay away from anything like that, just putting a bandage or something on the wound, just trying to close it and stop bleeding as much as I can so I can get out and get to an emergency medical service. So don't just go sterilizing things and doing surgery on yourself, because it'll probably hurt a lot and might not be the best option. But just again, weigh your options, figure out what's best for you just to keep you alive. So that's the contents of our first aid kit and our 7 bushcraft survival first aid tips that'll help you to be able to survive in any situation when things happen, because they do at times, and it's important to be prepared for that. So like I said, it's super important to know what's in your first aid kit, know how to use it, make sure it's up to date, because if you don't know how to use it, it's not going to help you, especially in an emergency situation. Probably going to be a little bit frantic, hard to stay calm, hard to think, and if you've never used something in your first aid kit, it's probably going to be pretty difficult to make sure it works the best for you. And again, with any bushcraft first aid or survival first aid, your goal should be to turn small things into nothing, medium things into small things, and be able to hold big things long enough to get treated by a medical professional. That's really the goal with any of these. If you get a small cut, obviously it's not going to affect you too much. You can bandage it, fix it, keep going with your survival trip, keep having fun. If you get a medium thing, maybe you need to splint something or wrap something pretty good, you'll probably still be able to continue on, but it'll still hurt a little bit or cause you some pain, or just be something extra that you have to worry about. But if something big happens, if you need a tourniquet or if you've broken a bone, making sure that you have the tools and skills to be able to stop bleeding or stabilize yourself long enough that you can get to a medical professional and get it treated, because we want you to stay alive so you can keep exploring the outdoors and keep having fun. So I hope you enjoyed the video, I hope you learned some things, and I hope you got some great ideas for what to put in your first aid kit, whether that's just a normal first aid kit or a bushcraft, a survival first aid kit, something you take survival camping, anything like that. Again, it's super important to have and can literally save your life. Comment down below if there's anything I missed that you want to put in your first aid kit. Thanks so much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it and learned some new things. Make sure to like this video and hit the subscribe button so you'll be up to date on all the outdoor cowboy videos that come out every Saturday morning. So thanks a ton for watching. I appreciate you all a ton, and I'll see you guys in the next video. If you liked this video, make sure to check out the Outdoor Cowboy YouTube channel. We've got new videos every week, survival adventures, camping projects, tool restorations, and a whole bunch more. Hit that like button, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.